Good afternoon. I'm Tracy Sinclair. Earlier today in Pascagoula, Mississippi, the USS Ted Stevens was christened. Our crew was down there, and we wanted to bring you an extended version of the ceremony. Now, this is almost the complete ceremony. You will notice that it is a live camera, so sometimes there are camera movements that you don't typically see on our broadcast. This is the majority of the ceremony with very few edits. It takes about an hour, but it is quite moving, and it ends, of course, with them christening the ship. So we want to share with you from earlier today down in Mississippi, the christening of the USS Ted Stevens.
Welcome to Ingalls Shipbuilding and to the christening ceremony for Ted Stevens DDG-128, a United States Navy Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. I am Katie Weldon, an Ingalls shipbuilder, and I have the privilege of serving as today's Master of Ceremonies. Now, I invite you to please rise if you are able, as the official party takes their place on the platform. Captain Mary Katie Hayes, United States Navy, Commanding Officer, Pre-Commissioning Unit Ted Stevens, and Prospective Commanding Officer, Ted Stevens, DDG-128. Captain Randy Slav, United States Navy, Commanding Officer, Supervisor of Shipbuilding Gulf Coast. Captain Seth Miller, United States Navy, DDG-51, Class Program Manager. Mrs. Laura Beth Sexton, Matron of Honor. Miss Chelsea Becker and Miss Megan Becker, Maids of Honor, escorted by Master Oscar Sexton, Attendant. Miss Jill Boward, Executive Director for Combatants, Program Executive Office Ships. Vice Admiral Jeffrey Hughes, United States Navy, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfighting Development. The Honorable Russell Rumbaugh, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Financial Management Comptroller. Our principal speaker for today's christening ceremony, the Honorable Sean O'Keefe, 69th Secretary of the Navy, 10th Administrator of NASA, and former staff, Senator Ted Stevens. Ship sponsors, Mrs. Catherine Stevens, wife of the late Senator Ted Stevens, Mrs. Susan Kovich, Senator Ted Stevens' daughter, and Mrs. Lily Becker, Senator Ted Stevens' daughter, escorted by Mrs. Carrie Wilkinson, President of Ingalls Shipbuilding and Executive Vice President, HII. The Navy Band Southeast Brass Quartet will now render honors to the Honorable Russell Rumbaugh. Distinguished guests, please remain standing for the presentation of colors by the Naval Construction Battalion 11 Color Guard, for our national anthem, for our Pledge Allegiance led by Miss Olivia Beausarge, pipe foreman here at Ingalls and a United States Marine Corps veteran, and for our invocation led by Lieutenant Kyle Bashirs, Chaplain Corps, United States Navy Chaplain, Commander Navy Region Southwest Reserve Operations Center. Color Guard, parade the colors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Color Guard, retire the colors. Lieutenant Bashirs will now deliver the invocation.
Let us pray. Almighty God, maker of heaven and earth, today we pause to admire the skilled industry of men and women, both military and civilian, who together have labored on the construction of this strong and mighty ship that will soon sail upon the seas of your creation. We celebrate with humble thanksgiving the christening of the USS Ted Stevens, the ship that will carry our nation's bravest men and women of the United States Navy wherever and whatever duty calls. We ask that you bless and keep those who serve aboard this ship. May they serve in such a way that honors and reflects the extraordinary achievements, resolute integrity, and moral courage of the man for whom this ship is named. And above all, may this ship and crew reflect our nation's strength and resolve in the honorable pursuit of a just peace. And if they fight, should a fight come, may they do so with honor, courage, and commitment that binds our fighting spirit together with those who have served before them. Bless them with moral fortitude and indomitable resilience to serve well. It is in your holy and precious name we pray these things. Amen.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bashirs. You may all be seated. There are several special guests in our audience today. Our ship sponsors are joined by many family members, friends, Ted Stevens Foundation, Ted Stevens Commissioning Committee, and former staffers. Please help me welcome them. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Wachowski, representing the Honorable Lisa Murkowski, United States Senator, Alaska. Miss Robin Incubus Anderson, representing the Honorable Dan Sullivan, United States Senator, Alaska. Miss Ann Zumwalt, sponsor of the USS Zumwalt, DDG 1000, representing the Society of Sponsors. We would also like to welcome a few more special guests, including our state, regional, local elected officials, and community leaders joining us this morning. We also welcome all of our partners and customers from the Navy's Program Office and the Supervisor of Shipbuilding Gulf Coast. And a special welcome to the crew of the future USS Ted Stevens DDG 128. Please stand so we can recognize you. Thank you all for being here with us this morning. Now, please help me welcome our Ingalls shipbuilders in the audience today. Thank you, shipbuilders. Today, we are also honored to welcome a group of American heroes from the Armed Forces Retirement Home in Gulfport who have joined us for this ceremony. We want to take a moment to give them all a round of applause for their service, sacrifice to our great nation. Please join me in expressing gratitude to these American heroes. Thank you all for your service. And finally, a special welcome to the numerous shipbuilders, crew members, and friends joining us through live stream. And now, please help me welcome our host for today's christening ceremony, Mrs. Carrie Wilkinson, President of Ingalls Shipbuilding and Executive Vice President, HII. Carrie?
Thank you, Katie. Good morning. Welcome to Ingalls Shipbuilding. What a gorgeous day. Whether you're here in person or attending virtually in air-conditioned comfort, it's an honor to be with such a spectacular group of folks for the christening of the future USS Ted Stevens DDG 128. Secretary O'Keefe, Secretary Rumbaugh, Vice Admiral Hughes, Ms. Boward, Captain Miller, Captain Slaff, Captain Hayes, our lovely sponsors, our matrons, our maid, and attendant, distinguished guests, fellow shipbuilders, good morning to you all. It is a beautiful day to christen a ship. I will begin by saying that when I checked the weather this morning, my weather app said it is supposed to be a balmy 95 degrees here today in sunny Pascagoula, Mississippi, with a feels-like temperature of the surface of the sun. I'll keep my welcome brief. In contrast, when I got to the shipyard this morning, it was just 40 degrees in Barrow, Alaska, and I will have to admit that I had to look that up on a map. But I start with these facts because much like shipbuilding, they to some extent represent extremes. And shipbuilding is indeed a pursuit of extremes. Shipbuilding is also a pursuit of passion. You have to want to do this kind of work, and it is certainly a way of life. And for this reason, and about 100 others, I believe shipbuilders, like those we serve, are very special. Now, when I say extremes, I'm referring to the opposite ends of many spectrums. Temperature, time, distance, risk, to name a small number of them. And it is my belief that it is the human spirit, the passion of people, of shipbuilders, that bridges from one end of any of these spectrums to the other. Temperature, from Alaska to Mississippi, or from winter to summer, is connected by a shipbuilder's desire to support their families and their willingness to brace themselves against the cold in winter or bear the heat of South Mississippi summer. Time, a shipbuilder's dedication to fulfilling a purpose and supporting a mission much bigger than themselves, connects the marathon of years-long production spans with the sprints required to support equipment light-off events and system activation. Distance, whether the one that must be walked in the cold, the heat, or the rain from the furthest point of the parking lot to the waterfront, or the one traveled from Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, or Louisiana each and every day to come and do this important work, is spanned by a shipbuilder's commitment to one another and to the mission. Risk, that which is mitigated throughout this difficult and complex work, is also connected to the other end of its spectrum, reward, through the tenacity of shipbuilders and their unwavering all-in defiance of any odds when they put their mind to something. To say I am proud of my fellow shipbuilders is an understatement. And because of them, I am so very grateful and humbled to call myself one. So today, from Alaska to Mississippi, we are connected as a community of shipbuilders and sailors and of servants by both the passion of shipbuilders who have brought us to this point in construction, and also by the late, great Senator Ted Stevens and his passion for service. We are grateful to everyone that is a part of our community and this mission, and we are grateful to our United States Navy and the nation for entrusting us with doing this work that we do here in Pascagoula. Thank you for allowing me to speak today on behalf of all of the men and women, the shipbuilders of Ingalls Shipbuilding, and the entire HII team. It is an honor to serve you on whatever end of any spectrum we may find ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. At this time, please help me welcome Vice Admiral Jeffrey Hughes, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfighting Development.
Thank you, Katie. Secretary O'Keefe, Secretary Rumbaugh, Mrs. Wilkinson, Mrs. Stevens, Mrs. Kovich, Mrs. Becker, and the rest of the Stevens family, Ms. Boward, Captains Miller, Slaff, and Hayes, distinguished guests, and finally, the heroes that make up the crew and shipyard workforce. Good morning. On behalf of our Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, I am honored to be here to participate in the 76th christening ceremony of the Arleigh Burke class of guided missile destroyers, celebrating this ship so skillfully and superbly built by the team here at Huntington Ingalls Industries, Ingalls Shipbuilding Division. We take immense pride in christening this fighting ship, entrusted to the world's finest sailors who will in the not too distant future put to sea and carry the name of a heroic American, Senator Ted Stevens, across the globe to protect and advance our interests, deter conflict, and if necessary, to fight and win. I confidently assert that the quintessential Navy surface combatant is the destroyer, and an Arleigh Burke class destroyer is the most preeminent among all others worldwide in service today and for years to come. The destroyer provides an unmatched capability to control the seas and project American power across the globe. From achieving maritime superiority against adversary forces to protecting capital ships and convoys, these ships operating in strike groups or in surface action groups, often with our allies and partners, underwrite our ability to maintain the rules-based international order and secure the peaceful use of the maritime, air, and space commons for all. As a naval aviator who has flown Seahawk helicopters from every Navy ship class, embarking in and operating from destroyers has been my absolute favorite. Integrating the sensors and weapon systems of the Seahawk with that of the ship, and living with and operating with a perfect-sized crew of shipmates for life has provided me my fondest memories and greatest professional satisfaction. There's nothing I would cherish more than to fly an approach to landing on the Ted Stevens, observing the name on the stern of the ship just as I crossed the threshold of the flight deck seconds before touchdown. I'm jealous, but also filled with pride for the air crew who will note with honor that they landed on and served aboard the Ted Stevens. During World War II, then First Lieutenant Stevens served in the Army Air Corps and flew missions with the 14th Air Force in support of the Flying Tigers in the China, Burma, India theater. This entailed dangerous mountain flying over the Himalayas with a significant risk of Japanese aerial attack. For his valiant service, he was awarded 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 2 Air Medals for exceptional airmanship in combat conditions. Elected to the Alaska State House in 1964, he then served as a U.S. Senator from 1968 until 2009, the 10th longest serving senator in the history of our republic, over 40 years. Throughout his public service, Senator Stevens worked tirelessly to improve the lives of Alaskans and fellow Americans. He had a strong and steady hand in crafting legislation that strengthened the military, and his efforts to improve the national security of the United States are still evident today. Catherine, Susan, Lily, and the rest of the family with us today we are truly honored and humbled to be with you during this incredibly meaningful time. And we thank you for your years of service to your communities, state, and nation, especially your support to the service members and their families and our veterans. Senator Ted Stevens lived and led throughout a lifetime of service and provided a prominent example of servant leadership in all that he did, which has strengthened our nation and advanced our cause as a people. I have no doubt that the sailors who will serve aboard the Ted Stevens will continue to recall and adopt his brilliant and inspirational example of service, and I pray that we all do as well. Lead with courage, Godspeed, and yours I to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Admiral Hughes. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the podium the Honorable Russell Rumbaugh, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Financial Management Comptroller.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today representing the Secretary of the Navy. Sends his regrets. You won't be surprised to hear that Navy secretaries like christening ships. But he's off trying to help expand the NATO alliance against the acute threat of Russia, so you've got me. Secretary Carlos del Toro has 3 enduring priorities: strengthen maritime dominance, build a culture of warfighting excellence, and enhance strategic partnerships. A christening is always an example of strengthening maritime dominance. And a powerful example of warfighting excellence is Captain Hayes and her crew's development as they prepare alongside the ship. But today is really about strategic partnerships. The Navy naming a ship for Senator Ted Stevens is a powerful symbol of the importance of partnerships. He was a staunch advocate for the U.S. Navy and all of our nation's military, and an advocate because he understood the partnership inherent in the divide of the U.S. government into 3 co-equal branches. Too often, when we describe our unique form of government, we focus on the checks and balances built into it. And those Madisonian tools are incredibly important. They are what have kept our country, the greatest country in the world, free and representative. They are what have ensured the longest written Constitution ever. They are what all of us in service, especially the crew here today, took an oath to defend. But let's face it, checks and balances are also obstacles, as they are supposed to be to achieve all the good things I just described. We are, however, currently suffering from what happens when those checks and balances run amok. We have over 300 military nominations hung up on one informal check in our divided government, including both service chiefs in the Department of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps. I've seen firsthand how much that is causing disruption in the Department of the Navy. Because of the sailors you see here, we will keep our nation safe, but it's much harder than it needs to be, and I can only hope we get relief soon. If the U.S. government only functioned by checks and balances from co-equal branches, we would never get anything done. And that is what Senator Stevens understood, and why Secretary Del Toro has made strategic partnerships one of his 3 enduring priorities. The Department of the Navy, the U.S. Congress, and the third partner represented here today, our shipbuilding industry, make things happen together. None of us can do it on our own. Instead, we partner to give the nation the greatest Navy in the world. We need to partner. But by partnering, we do more than that. By partnering, we are stronger than we would be on our own. I'm the comptroller, the money guy. I have to pause here to emphasize that the USS Ted Stevens will be the 78th ship of the DDG 51 class. 78. A triple-digit ship number. Those kind of figures warm a comptroller's heart. It means we have an exceptional warship, the best in the world, that we are producing at scale. That we have learned how to build it better, which allows us to buy and produce even more exceptional warships. That quality, married to quantity, is what ensures the U.S. Navy will dominate the maritime domain for decades to come. And we achieved that because of partnerships. Partnerships with Congress, represented by one of our staunchest supporters, Senator Stevens. Thank you, Catherine, Lily, Susan, for embodying that partnership by being here in person and being willing to serve as this ship's sponsors. You will hear many times today how important that responsibility is to the ship and our company. And partnership with industry, represented here today by the men and women of the Hunting and Ingalls Industries who made this ship a reality. Thank you to all the work you have done and will do. Finally, while I'm honored to be here to represent the Department of the Navy and say these words, no one can represent the Navy's commitment to this partnership, not even Admiral Hughes or our former SecNav, Secretary O'Keefe, as much as Captain Hayes and the crew here today. To all of you, thank you for your support for this vital partnership.
Thank you, Secretary Rumbaugh. And now, for our principal speaker for today's christening ceremony, the Honorable Sean O'Keefe, 69th Secretary of the Navy, 10th Administrator of NASA, and former staff, Senator Ted Stevens. Secretary O'Keefe.
Thank you all very, very much for their being here and recognizing this remarkable day. To the sponsors of the Ted Stevens and the extended family, I mean, it's an extended family of Ted Stevens who is represented here today. Secretary Rumbaugh, Admiral Hughes, Captain Hayes, President Wilkinson, honored guests from the great state of Alaska, of which there are multitudes of them here as well. It is an extraordinary privilege to be part of this unbelievable occasion. Now, every single christening always observes that it is Navy folklore that ship christening assures that the vessel will assume the personality and the character of her sponsor. Now, if so, the DDG-128 will be blessed with the characteristics of three extraordinary women who have personal traits that will assure that the ship and her crew will stand out as exemplary performers in the fleet of the United States Navy and serve the nation with great distinction. Each of the co-sponsors, Catherine Stevens, Susan Kovich, and Lily Becker, manifest the strength of dedication to family, community, allegiance to the state of Alaska and the nation. And they conduct themselves with generosity, integrity, principle, and compassion. Like so many gathered here today, they have a deep pride in the exceptional public service and dedication to the nation demonstrated by the ship's namesake, the Honorable Ted Stevens. He was the long-serving senior senator, as you've heard, for the state of Alaska, and an incomparable citizen of this great nation who viewed his paramount duty to provide for the security of our country. During his long life, he pursued every means to protect the country, preserve this extraordinary experiment of democracy that has sustained us over more than 2 centuries, and assure that this nation would survive and thrive as a global exemplar and role model for citizens of the world. Indeed, Ted Stevens was a globalist for many of the same reasons that other statesmen of his time realized the interconnection of economies, the power of trade, maritime commerce to enhance national reach, and the means to come together collectively only when necessary to thwart autocrats who would otherwise seek to disrupt and destroy merely to advance their own interests. Ted Stevens knew firsthand that if we fail to have such means and the will to use it, that the fight would come to us in the communities, states, and nation that we live in. As a prominent member of the greatest generation, coming from incredibly modest means, he selflessly stepped up to the call to serve and distinguished himself in the Army Air Corps as an aviator, as you've heard, serving in the Asia-Pacific Theater, and a member of the Claire Chennault Flying Tigers, He was enormously proud of that experience. And for his exceptional service, as you've also heard, he was awarded 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 2 Air Medals. When World War II ended, though, he resumed his pursuit of a college degree at UCLA and on to the law school at Harvard, bootstrapping his way with support from the GI Bill and several part-time jobs, including hazard duty bartending in Boston. After earning his law degree, his adventurous spirit landed him in Fairbanks, Alaska, then part of a U.S. territory. And thereafter, he started a public service career of more than 6 decades that began as the U.S. Attorney for the territory, a move to Washington at the Interior Department, and a front row seat and activist for Alaska statehood. He later returned to Alaska and served as a member of the new state legislature that led to his appointment and repetitive re-election to the United States Senate for over 4 decades. He became a master of the legislative process, deciding and figuring out how to get things done, an understanding of the institution's historic procedures, and his capacity to reach across the partisan divide to enlist support in pursuit of common goals, produced wide-ranging and extraordinary legislative accomplishments to the benefit of his state and to the nation. Across the state for his service, he is fondly referred to as Uncle Ted. For all kinds of good reasons. Everyone felt they knew him, because he made it a point to try to get to know everyone who was his constituents, regardless of party registration, political persuasion, interests of anything else. They were all Alaskans, and that was his focus. His work yielded equitable treatment of Native Alaskans, fair standards for commercial fishing and maritime commercial trade, a renewal of the Coast Guard, capacity to protect the vast coastline of our nation, Special Olympics and its recognition, national support that's been provided, and the means to achieve energy independence. And these are just a small sampling of everything this guy did. He truly lived a life that mattered. And mattered to an awful lot of people who to this day benefit by his exceptional service. His long service as chair or ranking member of the Defense Appropriations Panel for nearly 30 years provided a preeminent capacity of national security assets, technology, power projection, and the talent, the human talent we enjoy today, who are drawn to the service of our country in uniform. That accomplishment is attributable in no small measure to the legendary relationship that he and fellow veteran of the greatest generation, Senator Daniel Inouye, for Hawaii forged over their comparable years of service in the United States Senate. They transcended partisanship and applied their talents and dedication to the common cause of national objectives. Both men were proud globalists who protected their state and their country first, but believed that you must be active, must be present across the globe to have that influence. Both men freely observed that they each had very clear policy preferences and principles that often had differences between them. But they actively sought opportunities to advance the issues they had in common, not the ones they disagreed on, to look for areas where they did agree and respected each other when their objectives diverged. Their example is the gold standard for statesmanship. to advance the nation's priorities and security. Now, lest these comments leave anyone with the errant impression that Ted Stevens was an effusive, gregarious, get along to stay along, backslapping politician, genteel figure of diplomacy, and a pushover just to secure some measure of peacefully attained success. To the contrary, there was another very distinctive side of this man, of this patriot. He was tenacious, persistent, dogged, relentless, and fearless in pursuit of what he believed was right. He had an uncommon capacity to identify nonsense. You could translate that to another phrase. Could readily tell when someone was foolishly trying to pull something over on him, and he'd call things exactly as he saw them. Even if that meant his commentary would blister the paint or cause wallpaper to peel. And I witnessed both on many occasions. He could muster the effect of raging temper like nothing imaginable. He did not suffer fools well. He wasn't known by some as Tough Ted for nothing. But to those who didn't know him well, some considered that to be very intimidating. To the press, some called him a raging bull. But he knew, and had great self-awareness, he knew how he was perceived and how to use that to great advantage. He once observed, I thought, absolutely most poetically, that he never lost his temper. He always knew exactly where he'd left it. I had the extraordinary good fortune to work for him very early in my professional public service life. A dozen years after he came to the Senate. And he had just become the chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee when I had a chance to work on that committee. I learned quickly that he was most considerate to give staff advance notice when his legendary disposition was about to be put on display. When he intoned phrases like, "Listen, Chief," that meant instructions would follow, and they weren't going to be negotiable. Captain Hayes, I would suggest that you use that phrase of "listen, Chief" a little more caring, as it pertains to the number of respondents that you're likely to get aboard the USS Ted Stevens, that's for sure. When he began a diatribe on some matter, he would occasionally use the preference, "I'll bet you didn't know." Now that meant that there was going to be a factoid that was about to be revealed that many may well have never known, but only to him. And so your job as staff would be soon to research every possible means to make support for this statement an accurate one. And when all else failed, to force opponents to relent, he unleashed the fury, particularly when he wore his incredible Hulk tie. This was a tell to all of his colleagues that he was about to really have a difficult negotiation. And most people would kind of step away from the idea of being referred to as the Incredible Hulk. This transformative figure that suddenly turns into something different. No, he embraced it. This was an opportunity to negotiate before he ever had to say a word. And that was enough sometimes for folks to relent because they just didn't want to take it on. At a particularly memorable meeting of appropriation members from the House of Representatives to reconcile differences of agreement on House and Senate versions of an appropriation measure, there was a seemingly irreconcilable impasse on an important matter that he really wanted to see passed, and the House was dug in. After a withering defense of his position that seemingly lasted an eternity, a House member signaled to me that the House conferees had had enough and they were ready to relent. I immediately conveyed this to Senator Stevens, who, upon hearing this welcome news, turned to his House colleagues and said, "He tells me you're going to give me what I want if I shut up." To which the House chair said, "Please do so right now." To which Stevens obliged with a big smile and said, "Thank you," and moved on. Ted Stevens was a wonder to behold. His interests varied widely. The causes he pursued were diverse, and his appetite for new issues and challenges seemed unending. He engendered loyalty to those around him by being for those who were fiercely loyal to him. And I learned that after I left the Senate Appropriations Committee staff for him, that I still worked for him throughout the rest of my life and the rest of his. And it is true to this day. This is a guy I would follow to the edge of the earth. He engendered that level of loyalty as well as demonstration of leadership and the courage to lead. For those of us who had the privilege to work for him and with him, we often observed that it was a great privilege. They treated us all like family. And the great challenge was that he treated us all like family. You get both ends of that equation and its meaning. He had an outsized expectation of us and pursued all of us hard to achieve them. But he never gave us more than what he believed we could handle and never asked us to do anything that he wasn't prepared to do himself. And he often did. He was my mentor, my colleague, my boss, my friend. And not a day that goes by that I don't reflect on something about him that he taught me. The genuine compassion that he showed, the values he exhibited through his life, and the multitude of conditions, people, and things that he left better than the way he found them. That is the ultimate goal of any public servant. And if you can achieve that, you've done very well indeed. I started this commentary by observing that it's often true that the culture of a ship comes to resemble her sponsors, in this case. To Captain Hayes and the crew of the Ted Stevens, this ship has the great good fortune to have three extraordinary co-sponsors who are sure to pass on their admirable qualities in the culture of this amazing instrument of national power that has been entrusted to you. Lead with courage, the motto of the ship. The courage to be determined, the courage to be diligent, and to be focused on mission on behalf of your shipmates, your families, and the nation as a whole. I am supremely confident that the spirit of Ted Stevens will be standing watch with you during the performance of your duties around the globe that you will be charged. And for that, this is a most fortunate ship indeed. Godspeed and fair winds and following seas be with you always.
Thank you, Secretary O'Keefe. As Carrie noted earlier, we are honored to have our ship sponsors with us for this historic day. Representing our ship sponsors, please help me welcome Mrs. Lily Becker to the podium for her remarks.
Look back, and it was 10 years ago that Secretary O'Keefe gave us the news that the Senate had directed the next available warship to be named the USS Ted Stevens, and that it would be alongside the Daniel Inouye. We were overwhelmed. There could be no more fitting tribute to my father and his friend, Senator Inouye, the senator from Hawaii. If anyone here does not know who he is, I give you full permission to stop listening to me and look him up. Dad and Senator Inouye met in the Senate and formed a bond so close that they called each other brother. They shared a passion for their home states, both small in population and remote from the continental U.S. They also both had a deeply rooted passion for supporting the military. Senator Inouye had received the Medal of Honor for his service. They both served in the war in different theaters, and they made quite a pair. Senator Inouye, soft-spoken. My father, as Secretary O'Keefe mentioned, known for his fiery tirades. Different sides of the political aisle. They were public servants in the truest sense of the word. They were brothers. If this ship and the USS Daniel Inouye are out in the waters together, there is nothing that can stop them. A destroyer, a workhorse, not the biggest of them all, but nimble and powerful, capable of confidently forging into the unknown, the most lethal. Am I talking about the ship or the man? I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to describe in words the spirit that I know will sail with this ship. Determination. My father was a man who set his mind to things and made them happen. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, he wanted to enlist. The day he turned 19, he tried to, but he failed the eye exams. He knew that he could do more. He went home and found a doctor who gave him eye exercises, strengthened his eyes, and became an Army Air Cadet and then a pilot. He flew C-46 and C-47 cargo planes unarmed in a combat zone. He flew over and landed in occupied territory, loaded with ammunition and supplies. There were no navigational aids at all. He and his crew read clouds, calculated wind and ground speed, and found ways to battle weather and fuel scarcity to bring ammunition and supplies to troops in China. I remember him using a motto from the war many times. We do the impossible immediately. Miracles take slightly longer. Those of you out there who know him, I'm sure can call an image to your mind of him saying that with a twinkle in his eye and an upturned lip. Good luck to anyone who told him something was impossible. He delivered on miracles, but he wasn't alone. He pulled people together. He always had a crew with him, especially those friends and former staff who are here today. Confidence. He once said that his war service was where he developed his confidence. I wasn't even 21, and guys were calling me Dad. I was responsible for my mission, my airplane, and 4 other bodies. That's where I developed a sense of responsibility for others, learned to have confidence in myself. He didn't share much about his military service, so when he did, the stories are seared in my mind. He told me that when he was a cadet, his group was in awe one day at the pilots and what they were doing. The instructor said to them, "Do you know what they do first thing in the morning? They put on their pants one leg at a time." He told me that when I needed an extra boost to be confident I could get where I wanted to go. After the war, he put himself through college and law school with the help of the GI Bill. He finished 3 years of college in 18 months, and he went to Harvard Law School. He made it happen. He figured out what he wanted to achieve and put his head to it. Maybe more important than his confidence in himself, though, was his confidence in others. He knew what we could do before we did. I did some oral history interviews with former staff and colleagues a few years after he was killed. There was a resounding theme that he threw you into the deep end, but he had your back if you made a misstep. Loyalty. That's loyalty. He had your back. He would be right there with you. I know you all felt it because you are here today, 13 years after he was killed. If you came on board with Ted Stevens, you were part of the family. Captain Hayes, you and the crew are about to experience what my friend Karina, the executive director of the Ted Stevens Foundation, calls the revolving Stevens door. You're in the family now. And if you think you're about to walk out that door, it will grab you and pull you right back in. Motion. He moved often and he moved fast. More than one person had a hard time keeping pace with him around the Capitol, even in his 80s. He also helped our country move forward. He was fascinated by innovation. He wanted the armed forces to have the resources to address evolving global threats and worked tirelessly to make that happen. I doubt anyone could appreciate the advanced systems this ship has more than a pilot who flew unpressurized aircraft with no navigational systems through unknown mountainous territory. He wanted the military to have the best, to be prepared, but also to never have to face a conflict. Courage. He said courage with a turn of a smile. When asked anyone, "Is there something I can get you?" he looked at them and said, "Courage." He didn't need anyone to give it to him, though. This christening has made me have the chance to sit back and think about his service in the military. I spent the first 30 years of my life watching his courage on the Senate floor and anywhere he needed to stand up for what he believed in. He didn't follow the political ties, but the courage he had, it came from his early days. As I said, he didn't talk about the war much, but luckily a historian at the Library of Congress was able to squeeze a few out of him about his war service. And courage resounds. I landed at smaller airfields. I remember one that had been cut with hand tools out of a hill. It was just about 6 feet wider than the wings on each side. It was only about 1,000 feet long. Landing a loaded C-47 on 1,000 feet is the sort of an experience that if you live through it, you get air medals. Another one. We were coming back with a flight of 4 planes, and we were obviously in a squall line, a line of enormous thunderstorms. One plane decided he was going to try to go over it. 2 of them decided they'd go through it, and I decided I'd go under it. Now, when you go under a thunderstorm, you know what it's like to be under a thunderstorm. But I remember that we were coming in, and I saw a patch that I thought I could get through to go down and fly up a small river and go through a pass in the mountains, and then right onto our airfield. My crew chief locked himself in the John in the back of the plane, and my co-pilot was about ready to pull out his gun and shoot me. But I told him I thought we could do it, and we did it. And the other 3 planes went down. That's not skill, that's luck, so I don't think those of us who live through things like that ought to brag about them. They're just memories we have. And I can tell you 100 stories like that. Running out of gas just as we're coming down and having to get a plane full of ammunition and stuff on the runway when I knew I was out of fuel. Things like that happened. Humility. As he said, he did not brag about his service or his contributions to Alaska or our country. He downplayed it. He would be embarrassed to have this honor, to know we were spending any time talking about him. He would think that today should be about each person who contributed to the building of this incredible vessel, about those who will serve on it, and it is about you today. I imagine he would say something similar to what he did on Veterans Day in 2005. During the war, I served alongside the men and women who became known as the greatest generation. I was humbled by their patriotism and bravery. Today, our men and women in uniform are fighting a different war in a different time, but the dangers are just as real and the sacrifices just as heroic. The men and women who wear the uniform today are our nation's next greatest generation. We share a common bond. We are comrades in the deepest sense of the word, and I salute their service. My family and I pay tribute to the captain and crew and all who serve. We hope you will never be called to fight, but we know that if you are, you will be prepared with the best systems and the best people. You will have the spirit of Alaska and the determination of Ted Stevens with you. Be determined, be confident, be humble, be loyal. Captain Hayes, I know you and your crew will lead with courage. Now it's time to christen this ship and get her on her way.
Thank you, Mrs. Becker. And with that, it is now time to christen the future USS Ted Stevens DDG 128. Captain Hayes, Secretary O'Keefe, Mrs. Stevens, Mrs. Kovich, Mrs. Becker, and Mrs. Wilkinson will now make their way to the platform for the official breaking of the bottles.
Yes. Ready? Yes. In the name of the United States of America,
I christen thee, Ted Stevens. May God bless this ship and all who sail in her.
This concludes today's christening ceremony. Thank you all so much for joining us on this historic occasion. Please depart the christening site on the same side on which you arrived. Thank you for attending the christening of Ted Stevens DDG 128 and have a safe and happy weekend.
And there you have it. That was the christening ceremony from this morning in Pascagoula, Mississippi. That was almost the entire ceremony. There were just a few pieces cut out for because our camera was too tough to follow. It was a live camera, so you got to see a little more of the movement that you don't typically see. But a really wonderful ceremony to christen the USS Ted Stevens. We will have more on this story, of course, tonight at 5 and 10 on Alaska's News Source. Our crew will be down live from Mississippi with some of those other details, and we speak with the captain as well. So we'll have more of that over the next couple of days. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you back at 5 and 10 on Alaska's News Source. Or, of course, you can always find us on our website at alaskasnewssource.com or on our free streaming platforms. That's on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.